Hi, everybody. This is Denise Tawwab. I'm back with another video on information security risk. Today, we will be talking about the NIST Risk Management Process, and that's different from the risk management framework. Today, we'll be teaching from NIST Special Publication 839, Managing Information Security Risk, Organization, Mission, and Information System View. And in this presentation, we're going to cover just the fundamentals of the NIST risk management process. And then in subsequent videos, I'll drill down into more detail. Okay, what we're going to cover, we're going to start out talking about the four components of risk management according to NIST: multi-tiered risk management, Tier 1, organization view, Tier 2, mission business process view, Tier 3, information system view. And then we'll cover some risk management concepts such as trust and trustworthiness, organizational culture, and then the relationships among the key risk concepts. We'll talk about how one concept can impact another. All right, in this section, we're going to cover the components of risk management. There are four components in the risk management process. Component 1 is framing risk. Component 2 is assessing risk. Component 3 is responding to risk. And component 4 is monitoring risk. And that gives you the acronym FARM, F-A-R-M, for frame, assess, respond, and monitor. Okay, the nature of risk management, especially when you're talking about information security management, is that it's complex, it's multifaceted. If it's done right, it's holistic, and it involves the entire organization. So it is an organization-wide activity. Risk management is going to address risk from the strategic level down to the tactical level, and we're going to ensure that risk-based decision-making is integrated in every aspect of the organization. Senior leaders will provide the strategic vision and the top level goals. Mid-level managers will plan, execute, and manage projects. And the individuals on the front lines will be operating the information systems that support the business functions. Okay, again, the four components of the risk management process: frame, assess, respond, and monitor. Okay, framing risk. And so I'm going to briefly discuss each concept. In other publications, I drill down in detail, but framing risk is what happens when you establish a context for risk management. And this describes the environment in which you're going to make your risk-based decisions. Risk framing sets the boundaries for your risk-based decision. And what comes out of risk framing is the risk management strategy that addresses how the business actually intends to assess, respond to, and monitor risk. Risk framing, again, is the first component in the risk management process. It establishes the risk frame by identifying your risk assumptions, your risk constraints, like financial, whether you're dealing with legacy systems, legal, regulatory, contractual, and cultural constraints. We'll look at risk tolerance, the levels of risk that the company is willing to accept, the types of risk that you face, the time frames that you have for addressing risk, and the level of uncertainty around that process. And then finally, we'll talk about risk priorities and trade-offs, because as you well know, everything can't be done at the same time. And when you have a limited budget, you do have to set some priorities and you have to make some trade-offs. And the goal of risk management is to make sure that those decisions are as informed as possible. The second component in the risk management process addresses how the business assesses risk within the risk frame that was identified in step 1. Hold on just. I'm sorry, I need to grab some water. Okay, within risk assessment, within that step, we are going to identify threats to the organization, the vulnerabilities, internal and external, the impact, which is the harm that could happen as a result of risk, and the likelihood that harm will occur. When we do a risk assessment, what comes out of that is a determination of risk. And that's the degree of harm and the likelihood of harm occurring. To support the risk assessment component, We'll use tools, techniques, and methods to assess the risk. There are going to be assumptions related to the risk assessments. There will be constraints that affect risk assessments. There'll be roles and responsibilities. We'll talk about how risk information is collected, processed, and communicated throughout the organization. We have to decide how risk assessments will be conducted. Which method are we going to use? Will it be quantitative, qualitative, semi? What will it be? We also have to decide on the frequency of risk assessments and how threat information is obtained. And that would be what threat sources are you going to use and what methods will you use to deal with that threat information. The third component in the risk management process is risk response. Risk response addresses how the organization will respond to risk once the risk assessment is done. So we've done our risk framing, we've done a risk assessment. Now we have to make decisions about what are we going to do to respond to this risk that we've identified. Our risk response provides a consistent organization-wide response to risk in accordance with the organizational risk frame by developing alternative courses of action for response, then evaluating those alternative courses of action and determining the most appropriate course of action that's consistent with the organization's risk tolerance and their resources, and then finally implementing the risk response, deciding which control are we going to use, and then implementing those controls. To support the risk response component, we have to describe the types of risk response that can be implemented, whether we're going to accept the risk, avoid it, mitigate it, share it, or transfer it. And then we have to identify the tools, techniques, and methods that we'll use to develop courses of action for responding to risk. How are we going to make those decisions? And then we have to identify how we're going to evaluate the different courses of action that we have, and then determine how risk responses will be communicated across the organization, and if appropriate to our external partners like supply chain partners and external service providers, because with information security, sometimes your risk really does involve external parties. So be mindful of that. The fourth component in the risk management process is risk monitoring. The risk monitoring component addresses how organizations monitor risk over time. And the purpose of risk monitoring is to verify that planned risk response measures are implemented, to verify that the information security requirements that were derived from the mission business functions, that those security requirements are actually satisfied, and to determine that the controls that have been implemented to respond to risk are actually effective, that they were implemented correctly, are operating as intended, and are giving the business the desired security protection or the desired result. And then risk monitoring involves identifying the risk impacting changes to systems or to the environments in which the systems operate. So monitoring is an ongoing thing where we're continuing to look at the systems and at the organization to see how is our risk, what is our risk posture, and has anything changed? And if something has changed, where do we need to deal with whatever that change is? Okay, to support the risk monitoring component, we want to describe how compliance is verified. If we are subject to some regulatory or legal requirements or contractual, we want to describe how we know when compliance is actually is accomplished. We want to describe how the ongoing effectiveness of a risk response measure is determined. How do we know that it's effective? We want to identify changes to the systems and the environment that could impact risk. I mean, what are the events that could happen that could cause our risk levels to spike? And then we want to describe how changes that could impact the ongoing effectiveness of our risk responses are monitored. And so this is what the NIST risk management process looks like. Framing, of course, is in the center, but you're looking at, you do your risk frame, and then you assess, and then you respond, and then you monitor. And if you notice with the two-way arrows, the communication paths are two ways. And sort of every step ends up talking to the other step. So it's an organizational-wide, holistic, ongoing kind of conversation that has to happen for effective risk management to occur. Okay, the next thing we're going to cover is multi-tiered risk management. We'll look at the concept of multi-tiered risk management and then risk management at tier ones, two, and three. So, multi-tiered risk management in the NIST risk management process is a three-tiered approach that's used to address risk throughout the organization or the business. The process should be carried out seamlessly across the three tiers, and the overall objective is continuous improvement in the organization's risk-related activities and communications, and to make sure that all the stakeholders are communicating with each other. The three tiers are tier one, which is your organization layer, tier two, mission business process, and tier three, your information system. And so this is what multi-tiered risk management looks like. And if you'll notice, you start at the top from a strategic level and you go down to a tactical level when you get to the bottom. So at tier one, it's all about strategy. At tier three, it's all about tactics, getting it done. Tier two kind of sits in the middle and it's a little bit of both. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go into tier one and see what happens at tier one. Tier one is the organization view. What happens at tier one is governance, the risk executive function, the risk management strategy, and investment strategies. So governance. Governance is the set of responsibilities and practices exercised by those responsible for an organization, with the express goal of providing strategic direction, ensuring that the organization's mission and business objectives are achieved, ascertaining that risks are managed appropriately, verifying that the organization's resources are used responsibly. Strong governance is, in fact, the best indicator of senior leadership's commitment to effective and consistent risk management across the organization. So when an organization takes the time to put a governance program in place, then it becomes clear to everybody that, okay, they are serious about this. And this is, in fact, is key to making sure that you can do risk management in your organization. If you don't have buy-in from the top and leadership, it's going to be very hard to get anything done in this area. Governance is often organized by sector, but it must be unified. So, for example, risk and resources can be associated with legal, finance, IT, regulatory compliance, information security. And each sector has its own set of specialized experts in order to manage the risk associated with that sector. And so governance in organizations, a lot of the time, is organized by sector. And while governance is organized by sectors, organizations are well served by establishing a single aligned governance approach. So it's okay to divide it up by sector, but make sure that each sector has the same approach. A unified approach can coordinate the individual sector governance activities and can provide a consistent approach organization-wide. Okay, 5 outcomes of governance. What do you get when you govern? You get strategic alignment of risk management decisions with your mission and business functions consistent with your company's goals and objectives. 2, you get execution of your risk management process to frame, assess, respond to, and monitor risk. 3, you get an efficient and effective allocation of risk management resources. You allocate those dollars and the talent and the assets correctly. 4, you get performance-based outcomes by measuring, monitoring, and reporting risk management metrics to ensure that the goals and the objectives of the organization are being met. And 5, you get delivered value by optimizing risk management investments in support of business objectives. So you're tying your risk management to the achievement of business objectives. And if done right, risk management becomes a driver of business. It really does. And a lot of companies use it as a competitive advantage to say, we have this level of protection, but that's a different conversation. So let's keep moving. All right, governance determinations. As part of governance, senior leaders In consultation with what's called the risk executive function, will determine the types of risk management decisions that will be reserved for specific senior leadership roles. Because there are a lot of decisions, as you can imagine, that go with the risk management process and certainly with information security risk management. So at the top, we go ahead and decide who is responsible for what decisions. The types of risk management decisions that are deemed to be organization wide tend to happen at the senior level. The types of decisions that can be delegated to subordinate organizations or to other roles in the business is decided at the governance level. For example, systems and security engineers, your business owners, your enterprise architects, information security architects, service providers, and authorizing officials. You look at the list of decisions and you go ahead and decide who's going to handle what. And also, governance determines how the risk management decisions will be communicated to the risk executive function and by the risk executive function. Okay, there are three types of governance models: centralized, decentralized, and hybrid. And no matter what the governance model is, you have to have a clear assignment and accountability for accepting risk. Somebody has to clearly be assigned the responsibility for risk and be held accountable for accepting the risk. Keep that in mind. Okay, let's talk about the risk executive function. I mentioned it. Let's talk about what that is, because that is a NIST term. The risk executive The risk executive function is actually a functional role established within organizations to give you a comprehensive and organization-wide approach to risk management. The risk executive function serves as the common risk management resource for senior leaders, for mission and business owners, for CIOs, CISOs, information security owners, security architects, everybody in the organization and outside the organization who have a stake in the success of the organization and have an interest in information security. The risk executive function is established to be the single source of information for all of those people. So the risk executive function can be one person in small organizations, or it can be a committee. But what it does is it coordinates with senior leadership to establish the risk management roles and responsibilities that we talked about, to develop and implement a risk management strategy that guides and informs risk decisions, to manage threat and vulnerability information with regard to information systems and the environments in which they operate, to establish an organization-wide forum, one or more, to consider all types and sources of risk, to determine organizational information security risks based on the aggregated risk, and to provide oversight for risk management activities to ensure consistent and effective risk-based decisions. So that risk executive function is going to look at everything that's happening from a risk-based perspective and pull it up so that everybody in the organization who's managing risk, who's participating in that risk management dance, that they are all under the same understanding and they all have the same information. I hope that makes sense. All right, the risk executive function also develops a greater understanding of risk with regard to the strategic view of organizations and integrated operations. So it allows you to have a strategic view of your risk. It also establishes effective vehicles and serves as a focal point for communicating and sharing risk-related information. You know, as you can imagine, threat information is coming into the organization from many different sources to many different people within the organization. That information has to be communicated to all of the stakeholders. And that is one of the roles of the risk executive function. The risk executive function also specifies the degree of autonomy that subordinate organizations will have, whether your governance model is centralized or decentralized. In a centralized model, all the decisions are made at the top and pushed down. In a decentralized model, there are certain decisions that are made at the top, but then the subordinate organizations have some autonomy about how they move forward. The risk executive function also ensures that security authorization decisions consider all the factors necessary for mission and business success. Remember that before systems can operate, they have to actually be authorized to do so. So we want to make sure that those decisions have all the information that's necessary to make a good risk-based decision. And the risk executive function finally ensures that shared responsibility for supporting the mission and business functions of the organization using external providers receives visibility and is elevated to appropriate decision-making authorities. So that's your third-party risk management. Okay, some characteristics of the risk executive function. One, the risk executive function presumes neither a specific organizational structure nor formal responsibility assigned to one individual or group within the organization. Senior leaders may choose to retain the risk executive function or to delegate the function. It just depends on how much time they have to deal with information security risk. The risk executive function does require a mix of skills, expertise, and perspectives to understand the strategic goals and objectives of the organization, and to guide that so that it shapes organizational operations. And so you do have to have a mixed skill set in your risk executive function. To provide this needed mixture, the risk executive function can be filled by a single individual or an office supported by an expert staff, or by a designated group, for example, a risk board or an executive steering committee or an executive leadership council. Each organization, your organization will have to decide what that's going to look like for you, but it's very, very important that you do in fact have a risk executive function. You may call it something else, but you do need to have the risk executive function. 5, the risk executive function fits into the governance structure in such a way as to facilitate efficiency and to maximize effectiveness. And while the organization-wide scope situates the risk executive function at Tier 1, its role also involves ongoing communications with and oversight of the risk management activities that are happening at every layer of the organization. And that includes your mission business owners, your authorizing officials, information system owners, your common control providers, chief information officers, chief information security officers, engineers, managers, and other stakeholders who are working at tiers 2 and 3. So the risk executive function is primarily at Tier 1, but it's talking to everybody. All right, the risk management strategy. The risk management strategy is one of the key outputs of the risk framing step. Remember, the first step in the risk management process, according to NIST, is risk framing, and out of that comes the risk management strategy. The risk management strategy addresses how your organization intends to assess, respond to, and monitor the risks that are associated with the operation and use of your information systems. The risk management strategy is going to make explicit the specific assumptions, constraints, risk tolerance, and priorities and trade-offs that will be used for making investment and operational decisions. The risk management strategy will also include any strategic level decisions and considerations on how your senior executives are to manage information security risk to your operations and assets. So what's included in a risk management strategy? Glad you asked. An organization-wide risk management strategy includes an unambiguous expression of the risk tolerance for the organization, acceptable risk assessment methodologies, the risk response strategies, a process for consistently evaluating risk across the organization with respect to the organization's risk tolerance, and approaches for ongoing monitoring of risk over time. The risk executive function and the risk management strategy. The use of a risk executive function can facilitate consistent organization-wide application of the risk management strategy. So they work together. The organization-wide risk management strategy can be informed by risk-related inputs from other sources, internal and external to the organization, to ensure that the strategy is both broad-based and comprehensive. So basically, you want to make sure that you're considering everything that's happening in the ecosystem that impacts information security risk. All right, risk tolerance in the risk management process. An important tier one risk management activity, and also part of risk framing, is determining the organization's risk tolerance. And risk tolerance is the level of risk or the degree of uncertainty that is acceptable to organizations and is a key element of the organization's risk frame. Risk tolerance will affect all components of the risk management process. It directly impacts the risk management decisions that will be made by your senior executives throughout the organization, and it provides important constraints on those decisions. Let me give you an example. Risk tolerance will affect the nature and extent of risk management oversight implemented in the organization. It will impact the extent and rigor of risk assessments performed, and it will also impact the content of your organizational strategies for responding to risk. How risk tolerant are you? How risk averse are you? Depending on how risk tolerant your organization is, you may need more controls. You may need to spend more money on security. If you're more risk tolerant, you may need to spend less money on security. If you're less risk tolerant and you've got some strict constraints that you're operating under that causes you to be risk averse, then you will likely spend more money on security. Example 2, with regard to risk assessments, more risk tolerant organizations may be concerned only with those threats that peer organizations have experienced. So we're not really worried about threats. We're just going to manage the threats that our peers in the business have faced, the known threats. We know that exists. We've heard about it. It's hit somebody else. So we're going to take action to respond to that threat. But we're more risk tolerant, so we don't have to be as anxious and stringent about how we manage risk. Less risk tolerant organizations may expand the list to include those threats that are theoretically possible, but which have not yet been observed in operational environments. So again, if you're less risk tolerant, if you have a lower tolerance for risk, then you will have to include more threats and figure out how you're going to mitigate the risk associated with those threats. But that's a different conversation. We'll get there. Example 3, with regard to risk response, how are we going to respond to risk? Less risk tolerance organizations are likely to require additional grounds for confidence in the effectiveness of selected safeguards and countermeasures. They're likely to prefer safeguards and countermeasures that are more mature and have a proven track record. And they may decide to employ multiple safeguards and countermeasures from multiple sources. For example, antivirus software at clients and servers that are provided by different vendors. And what that comes down to is more money and certainly more time. All right, still talking about how risk tolerance impacts the risk management process. Example 4. Is that risk tolerance can also affect the organizational requirements for trustworthiness provided by specific information technologies. So 2 organizations may choose the same information technology, but their relative degree of risk tolerance may impact the degree of assessment required prior to deploying that technology. So we're both going to the cloud, but I'm more risk tolerant than you are. So I can go to the cloud and not have to worry about a lot of security controls. I mean, I have to put in some countermeasures, but I don't have to be really, I'm not handling any PII, any personal identifiable information, no credit cards, nothing that is really risky. So I can look at it and do a quick assessment. Well, not a quick assessment, but do an assessment and keep it moving. But the lower your risk tolerance, the more you're going to look at technology and assess it before you deploy it. I think I said that right. So there is no correct level of organizational risk tolerance. The degree of risk tolerance in an organization or business is generally indicative of the organizational culture. It's potentially different for different types of losses or compromises, and it is highly influenced by individual subjective risk tolerance of your senior management. Let me say that again. There is no correct level of risk tolerance. Rather, the degree of risk is going to be indicative of your organizational culture. If you're with the Department of Defense, you're looking at risk a whole different way than somebody from the Museum of Art. You're looking at risk differently because the stakes at the Department of Defense are much, much higher than at a museum. The degree of risk tolerance will probably be different for different types of losses and compromises, and they will be highly influenced by senior management's subjective risk tolerance. And that's subjective because it'll depend on their backgrounds. Again, if you're working in corporate America, but you've got a senior executive who is from Department of Defense or the intelligence industry, he or she is still going to have a more stringent approach to risk management than someone who came from managing one of the libraries. It's just going to be different just because of the background of that senior executive. And so that will also impact the organizational risk tolerance. The determination of risk tolerance is going to impact the effectiveness of the risk management process. The ramifications of risk decisions based on risk tolerance are potentially profound and really impact how money is allocated. Less risk tolerant organizations may fail to achieve needed business capabilities in order to avoid what appears to be unacceptable risk. And I'll give you an example. A lot of federal organizations have not yet moved to the cloud just because they can't really figure out how to assess that risk and determine and figure out how to mitigate the risk. And so much is at stake. A business decision has been made across a lot of federal organizations, and that's certainly changing now. But for a while, federal organizations made the decision, yes, we know that there are cost savings, huge cost savings in the cloud, but no, we're not moving our stuff there because we don't know what's happening out there in the cloud. More risk-tolerant organizations may focus on near-term business efficiencies at the expense of setting themselves up for future failure. So again, same situation, but a more risk-tolerant organization, they may jump too soon and assume too many risks just because they're more risk-tolerant, and they won't know that until later it bites them. It's important that organizations exercise due diligence in determining risk tolerance, recognizing how fundamental this decision is to the effectiveness of the risk management program. And where it really hits you is in your budget. If you are less risk tolerant, you're going to need more controls, more preventative measures. You're just going to need more of everything to be sure that everything that you need to secure is secure. And that is going to cause the budget to inflate. If you're less risk tolerant, you will need to spend less money, but then you have to be careful and realize that there is an amount of money that you will have to spend. So keep that in mind. Okay, investment strategies. I think that's what I already started talking about. Let's see. Investment strategies play a significant role in risk management efforts. Investment strategies can include your approach to replacing legacy information systems, whether you're going to phase items in gradually or just replace the system entirely. Your approach to outsourcing and using external providers of information systems and information security services, whether you're going to do internal development or acquisition of commercially available technology products. Are you developing internally or getting it off the shelf? These strategies are generally going to reflect the long-term strategic goals and objectives of the business and the associated risk management strategies developed and executed to ensure business success. Underlying all investment strategies is the recognition that there is a limited amount of resources available to invest in making sure that the organization effectively manages risk. All right, mission and risk priorities when you're looking at investment strategies. Organizations generally conduct a number of missions and are involved in different types of business functions. And this is certainly true for large, complex organizations, huge federal organizations, big businesses that have different components Um, while all of these components and associated missions and business functions are likely to be important and play a key role in the overall success of the organization, in reality, they're not all equally important. They're just not. They're not all equally important. So the greater the criticality of a mission or a business function, then the greater the need for the organization to ensure that risk related to that mission and business function are adequately managed. Critical mission and business functions are likely to require a greater degree of risk management investment than business functions that are deemed to be less critical. The determination of the relative importance of the mission business functions and hence the level of risk management investment is something that is decided at tier 1 at the organization level, executed at tier 2 at the business mission level, and influences risk management activities at tier 3 down at the system level. So we're going to decide how money is invested at tier 1. Senior executive makes the decision about the budget. It's executed at tier 2. We got our money from senior management. Now we've got to make it work for this business function that we're in charge of. And the folk who are doing system management, the engineers and all the people down at the system level at tier 3, their activities will be influenced at what happened at tier 1 and tier 2. How much money did they give us? And how much did the boss decide to allocate to what? Still talking about investment strategies, let's look at anticipated risk response needs. There's a great variety in the nature of potential threats that organizations face, ranging from hackers who just want to deface the website, which is called cyber vandalism, to insider threats, to sophisticated terrorist groups, organized crime, a nation's military, nation states attempting to destroy or disrupt critical missions by attacking information systems. Note the threats described are a subset of the overarching threat space. I mean, there are tons and tons of threats. We could be here all day just talking about possible threats. That also includes areas of omission and commission, natural disasters, and accidents. The strategic investments required to address the risk from more traditional adversaries, for example, hackers, are considerably different than the investments required to address the risk associated with advanced adversaries who present what's called an advanced persistent threat. And that could be nation states or terrorist organizations with sophisticated levels of expertise and a whole bunch of money that are seeking to establish permanent footholds in organizations for purposes of impeding the mission of those organizations. But the strategic investments required will be different. If you're looking at your traditional everyday threats, you're spending less money than if you're facing advanced adversaries. And the reason I keep talking about money is because at the end of the day, when we talk about risk management and information security risk, all of this stuff has to be paid for. And the more you understand at this level, the better you will become at making the case to support an investment in a particular control or countermeasure. Okay, addressing less sophisticated threats. To address less sophisticated threats, organizations can focus their efforts at tier 3, investing to ensure that needed safeguards and countermeasures are obtained, implemented correctly, operating as intended, and producing the desired effect. Okay, so when I'm dealing with the everyday threats, I'm basically at the system level protecting the system. I've got my network security controls. I'm at the system level making sure that that system is locked down. In addition to those basic investments, you're going to also invest in continuous monitoring. So you're going to lock down the system and then you're going to invest in whatever you need to have to continuously monitor that system. So you're always aware of the security and privacy posture of that system. Now, with addressing advanced persistent threats, those are not going to be adequately addressed at tier 3 because the necessary security solutions are not available. You've got people out there coming up with threats right now that have not even been thought of. And so there are no countermeasures that you can go by. There's no software, there's no system that you can implement because the system hadn't been thought up yet. And in those instances, businesses, organizations have to purposefully invest beyond tier 3 for significant response capabilities at tier 2 and to some extent at tier 1. So at tier 3, the nature of investment is likely to change from implementing existing solutions to a strategic focus on investing in leading edge information security technologies, essentially experimenting with up and coming technologies and being early adopters, or investing in information security research and development efforts to address specific technology gaps. And a lot of times you will see public-private partnerships where government partners with corporations to do threat research and to look at developing products to mitigate some threats that may be coming down the pipe. This investment strategy is a change from vulnerability and patch management to a longer-term strategy addressing information security gaps, such as the lack of information technology products with the trustworthiness necessary to achieve information security resilience in the face of advanced persistent threats. So basically, you're not just doing patch management and vulnerability management. You're looking ahead and you're addressing what's coming down the wire. So addressing advanced persistent threats requires a long-term view. Information security investments to address APTs may require expenditures over the course of several years as new security solutions and technologies transition from research and development into full deployment. The long-term view of strategic investing in the risk response needs for organizations can help reduce the continuing focus on near-term vulnerabilities discovered in information systems. Vulnerabilities that exist due to the complexity of the information products and systems and the inherent weaknesses in those products and systems. So you're taking a long-term view as opposed to a singular look at the system and what's happening right now. All right, limitations on strategic investments. What limits your strategic investments is the ability of organizations to provide strategic information security investment. Wait, I didn't say that right at all. The ability of your organization to provide strategic information security investment is limited. Where the desired strategic investment funding or the strategic resources aren't available to address specific needs, your organization may be forced to make compromises. In some instances, the limitations may not be financial in nature, but limitations in the number of individuals in your company or your organization with the appropriate skill set and expertise, or limitations regarding the state of technology. So technology, people, and money can limit the strategic investment that you can make in information securities, in information security. Let's talk about compromises. When the desired funding or the strategic resources aren't available to address specific needs, then your company might be forced to make compromises. You might extend the time frame required for strategic information security objectives to be accomplished. So we're not going to do everything this year. We're going to push some stuff out to year 2, year 3, year 5, but you develop a longer term plan. You might prioritize risk management investments, opting to provide resources, financial or otherwise, to address your critical strategic needs sooner than other less critical needs. All investment decisions require organizations to prioritize risk and to assess the potential impacts associated with alternative courses of action. So chances are very good when you get into risk framing and beginning to stand up your information security program, the first thing you're going to run into is that you don't have all the resources that you need to do everything that's on the list. And so you will have to make some compromises, whether it be time, or just prioritizing what gets done first. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Tier 2, the mission business process view. And I think, now I'm actually going to keep this in this video. All right, Tier 2, mission business process view. It addresses risk from a mission business process perspective. Tier 2 addresses risk by designing, developing, and implementing business processes that support the business functions defined at Tier 1. The processes guide and inform the development of your enterprise architecture that provides a disciplined and structured method for managing the complexity of the organization's IT infrastructure. A key component of the enterprise architecture is the embedded information security architecture that provides a roadmap to ensure that business process-driven information security requirements and protection needs are defined and allocated to appropriate information systems and the environment in which those systems operate. Okay, you have to have risk-aware mission business processes. The risk management activity at Tier 2 begins with identifying and establishing risk-aware business processes to support the organization's missions and business functions. A risk-aware business process is one that explicitly takes into account the likely risk such a process would cause if implemented. Risk-aware processes are designed to manage risk in keeping with the risk management strategy defined at Tier 1 and explicitly account for risk when evaluating the business activities and decisions that happen at Tier 2, the business layer. The identification of organizational business processes includes defining the types of information that the organization needs to successfully execute those processes, the criticality and or the sensitivity of the information, and the way the information flows, both internal and external to the organization. So what information are we processing? How are we processing it? How critical is it? And how does it flow? Do we keep it in-house? Do we keep it in this department, or does it go across the company, across departments, or even outside of the organization? All of that has to be determined at Tier 2. Implementing your risk-aware business processes requires a thorough understanding of the mission and the business function and the relationships among the business functions and the supporting processes. So you have to understand the business. And that's part of risk management, really understanding the business, what's being done, why it's being done, so that when you're looking at your processes, you can see the gaps as it relates to security, but you can make decisions that still support the business function. This understanding is a prerequisite to building business processes sufficiently resilient to withstand a wide array of threats, including routine and sophisticated cyber attacks, errors, accidents, and natural disasters. When defining business processes, senior leaders have to understand the threat source and threat events, adverse impacts, and resilience to compromise. So an important part of achieving risk-aware processes is senior leaders understanding the types of threat sources and threat events that can harm the organization or harm the ability of the organization to successfully carry out its business functions. Senior leaders have to understand the potential adverse impacts or consequences on the organization if confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information or the information systems used in a business process are compromised. And senior leaders also have to understand the likely resilience to such a compromise that can be achieved with a given business process definition, applying realistic expectations for the resilience of information technology. So you have to understand the business, you have to understand the technology, and you have to understand what threatens you, what are the likely impacts, if something does happen, and how resilient can we expect that our systems will be. And how do we build resilience in? That's a different conversation. So a key output from Tier 2 is the risk response strategy. This is the selected risk response strategy for business processes within the constraints defined in the risk management strategy. So the risk response strategy will include an identification of information protection needs and the allocation of those information protection needs across components of the process. For example, allocation to protections within information systems, protections in the operational environments of those systems, and allocation to alternate mission business execution paths based on the potential for compromise. So this is business analysis. You're looking at the business, you're looking at information flows, execution paths, and you're coming up with a risk response strategy at tier 2. Let's talk briefly about enterprise architecture. Again, we're still at tier 2, the mission business process view of risk management. Enterprise architecture, a significant risk-related issue regarding the ability of organizations to successfully carry out business functions, is the complexity of the IT, or the information technology, being used in information systems. To address this complexity and associated potential risk, your organization needs a disciplined and structured approach for managing information technology assets that support business processes. Providing greater clarity and understanding of the information technology infrastructure of your organization, including the design and development of the associated systems, is a prerequisite for maximizing the resilience and wise use of systems in the face of increasingly sophisticated threats. The type of clarity and understanding can be effectively achieved through the development and implementation of enterprise architecture. So enterprise architecture is a management practice employed by organizations to maximize the effectiveness of business processes and information resources in helping to achieve business success. Enterprise architecture establishes a clear and unambiguous connection from money invested, including information security investments, to measurable performance improvements, whether for an entire organization or a portion of the organization. Enterprise architecture also provides an opportunity to standardize, consolidate, and optimize information technology assets. And these activities ultimately produce information systems that are more transparent and therefore easier to understand and to protect. So let's talk about this in layman's terms. You can run a company where everybody buys whatever software they need, run them on whatever systems they want. Different departments can buy whatever they want. You know, one department is using running a Linux shop, another one is, Windows, and then you've got some Macs over here, and you've got different access control measures. You've just got software out the wazoo. Nobody really knows, but you haven't structured it in any way. And when you have that happening, when you have people spinning up virtual machines and they don't have to register them, when you lack standards and consolidation and agreement and transparency about what hardware are we running, what software are we running, then it's very hard to protect the information, because protection needs will vary depending on the technology that you're using. And so that's where enterprise architecture comes in. It's where you standardize, consolidate, and optimize your IT assets. In addition to establishing a roadmap for more efficient and cost-effective usage of IT throughout organizations, enterprise architecture also gives us a common language for discussing risk management issues related to missions, business processes, and performance goals, enabling better coordination and integration of efforts and investments across the organization and business activity boundaries. A well-designed enterprise architecture, and there's a whole federal publication on that. There are college courses that are taught on just enterprise architecture. A well-designed enterprise architecture that's implemented organization-wide promotes more efficient, cost-effective, consistent, and interoperable information security capabilities to help your organization better protect missions and business functions, and ultimately more effectively manage risk. The federal enterprise architecture, because this publication, NIST 839, is directed primarily at federal organizations. The federal enterprise architecture defines a collection of interrelated reference models, including performance, business, service component data, technical, as well as more detailed segment and solution architectures that are derived from the enterprise architecture. Organizational assets are mapped to the enterprise level reference models to create a segment-oriented view of the organization. Note the federal enterprise architecture concepts that define needs-driven, performance-based business processes are applied by organizations recognizing that effectively managing risk arising from operating in a cyberspace environment with sophisticated, high-end threats is a key need and measure of performance. If you're not in a federal organization, this part won't make sense to you. But let's talk about federal enterprise architecture. Architecture segments are elements of organizations that describe mission areas, common shared business services, and organization-wide services. From an investment perspective, segment architecture drives decisions for a business case or group of business cases supporting specific mission areas or common shared services. The primary stakeholders for segment architecture are mission business owners. Solution architecture, which follows closely from segment architecture, architecture defines the information technology assets within the organization used to automate and improve business processes. The scope of solution architecture is typically used to develop and implement all or parts of information systems or business solutions, including your information security solutions. The primary stakeholders for solution architectures are information security developers and integrators, information systems owners, information system security engineers, and end users. Some enterprise architecture concepts: segmentation, redundancy, and elimination of single points of failure. And all of these concepts can help organizations manage risk more effectively. Segmentation is important because it allows the business to separate business functions and operations and the information systems, system components, or subsystems supporting those systems. Segmentation helps you to define more manageable components and to potentially reduce the degree of harm from a successful threat exploitation of a vulnerability. Segment architecture supports the concept of segmentation at the highest levels of the organization, and the concept is carried forward through solution architecture, including decomposing information systems and networks into subsystems and subnetworks as appropriate. So you're breaking things into manageable chunks. The concept of redundancy in enterprise architecture. With the high probability of breaches or compromises, the failure or degradation of one or more information system components is inevitable. Something is going to happen. It's going to bring a system down. It's going to be a critical failure. Your system is going down. To enhance information system resilience as part of risk response, organizational information systems provide a failover mode that helps to ensure that failed components trigger appropriate backup components with similar capability. This type of capability is going to be essential to address advanced persistent threats in situations where your organization might be required to operate while under cyber attack in a degraded mode, but still providing a sufficient level of capability to achieve mission business success. Segment and solution architectures support the concept of redundancy by establishing a disciplined and a structured approach to developing and implementing key architectural considerations that facilitate replication of critical information system components where that's appropriate. And then finally, elimination of single points of failure. The concept of single point of failure and the elimination of such failure points is easily supported by enterprise architecture. Having the essential visibility and transparency provided in the architectural design at the organization level exposes any potential single points of failure early in the development process. Thus, your single points of failure can be effectively addressed by segment and solution architectures. Failure to address potential single points of failure early in the architectural design can result in severe or catastrophic effects when those failure points are propagated to information systems, and then the actual failure causes a loss of business capability. So make sure that you identify and eliminate single points of failure. Okay, we talked about enterprise architecture. Next up is information security architecture. We're still at tier 2, mission business process view. Okay, the information security architecture is an integral part of the organization's enterprise architecture. It represents that portion of the enterprise architecture that specifically addresses information system resilience and provides architectural information for the implementation of the security capabilities. So we've got the enterprise architecture that shows us the overall organization and all the systems and how they interconnect and all of that. But then on atop that, you have to add okay, how are we going to secure this? And that's your security architecture. The primary purpose of the information security architecture is to ensure that mission business process driven information security requirements are consistently and cost effectively achieved in information systems and the environments in which those systems operate, consistent with the organization's risk management strategy. The information security architect also incorporates security requirements from legislation, directives, policies, regulations, standards, and guidance into the segment architecture. So when you're dealing with credit card information, when you're dealing with personally identifiable information, when you're dealing with healthcare information, patient information, there are some guidelines and some laws and some standards that come into place about how that data has to be handled and kept secure. And so that is addressed in the information security architecture. Ultimately, the information security architecture provides a detailed roadmap that allows traceability from high level strategic goals and objectives of the organization through specific business protection needs to specific information security solutions provided by people, processes, and technology. The information security requirements defined in the segment architecture. They're implemented in the solution architecture in the form of management, operational, and technical security controls. The security controls are employed within or inherited by the individual information systems and the environments in which those systems operate. The allocation of security controls is going to be consistent with the information security architecture, as well as concepts such as defense in depth and defense in breadth. Figure 3 illustrates the process of integrating information security requirements into the enterprise architecture and the associated information systems that support the business processes of the organization. Right here. So you see at the top, you have your risk management strategy, and you have your mission that comes at the organization level. And then you have your mission business processes. Well, underlying those processes is your technology and the technology that supports each business process and function. So you have your enterprise architecture, which will be your reference models used, your segment architecture, your solution architecture. And then within that, you have your information security architecture that includes the security requirements and the control allocation. And then the decisions that are made at the architectural layer flow down to each individual information system, as well as the environments in which those systems operate. So that's figure 3. So 7 risk management considerations addressed as part of the enterprise architecture. Here are things you can address: developing a segment architecture linked to the strategic goals and objectives of organizations, mission, business functions, and business processes. Identifying where effective risk response is a critical element in the success of the business. Defining the appropriate architectural level information security requirements within segments based on the organization's risk management strategy. Incorporating an information security architecture that implements architectural level information security requirements. 5, translating the information security requirements from the segment architecture into specific security controls for information systems and environments of operation as part of the solution architecture. 6, allocating management, operational, and technical security controls to information systems and the environments in which they operate as defined by the information security architecture. And 7, documenting risk management decisions at all levels of the enterprise architecture. The benefits of enterprise architecture is that it provides a disciplined and structured approach to achieving consolidation, standardization, and optimization of IT assets that are employed within the organization. And risk reduction can be achieved through the full integration of management processes organization wide, thereby providing greater degrees of security, privacy, reliability, and cost effectiveness for the missions and business functions being carried out by organizations. This integrated approach of incorporating the organization's risk management strategy into enterprise architecture gives your senior management the opportunity to make more informed, risk-based decisions in dynamic operating environments. So when you give them that picture where you show them what you're going to do and how things are starting to stack up, then it gives them more information about how to make those decisions. Decisions based on trade-offs between fulfilling and improving organization missions and business functions, and managing the many types and sources of risk that have to be considered as part of their risk management responsibilities. An enterprise architecture can enhance a business's risk posture by providing greater transparency and clarity in design and development activities, by enabling a more consistent approach of the principle of wise use of technologies across the business, by optimizing the trade-offs between value gained from and the risk being incurred through the information systems that are supporting your business functions. And so that's what happens at tier 2 at the mission business process level. And I know this is a lot of information. This is coming straight out of NIST Special Publication 839. And the reason I'm recording it this way is so that you can learn it the way that I did. I first read it and then I recorded it. And because it's on YouTube, I while I was driving in the car, I would listen to the recording over and over again, and that helped to cement the knowledge. And so hopefully you'll be able to use the video this way, but please understand that this is coming straight from 839. And I know that it can feel clunky at times. So hang in there with me. Thank you so much for doing that. We're down to tier 3, the information system view, risk management at tier 3, information systems view. All information systems are in some phase of the system development lifecycle, okay? Including operational systems, systems under development, and systems undergoing modification. All information systems are in some phase of the system development lifecycle. In addition to the risk management activities that are carried out at tiers 1 and 2, risk management activities are also integrated into the systems development lifecycle of organizational information systems at tier 3. The risk management activities at tier 3 reflect the business's risk management strategy and any risk related to the cost, schedule, and performance requirements for individual systems supporting the business functions of the organization. Risk management activities take place at every phase in the SDLC, with the outputs at each phase having an effect on the subsequent phase. There are typically 5 phases in the system development lifecycle: initiation, development/acquisition, implementation, operation/maintenance, and 5, disposal. Organizations may use a variety of system development lifecycle processes, including waterfall, spiral, or agile development. Let's talk about what happens at the initiation phase. Requirements definition is a critical part of any system development process and begins very early in the life cycle, typically in the initiation phase. The latest threat information that is available to your organization may significantly influence information system requirements and the types of solutions that are deemed to be acceptable from a technological and operation perspective in the face of such threats. Information security requirements are a subset of the functional requirements levied on information systems and are incorporated into the system development lifecycle along with the other requirements. So you've got your functional requirements for what your system, whatever system you're standing up or modifying or running, you've got your functional requirements, what that system must do, but you also have information security requirements depending on the type of information that's flowing through that system. The information security requirements define the needed security functionality for information systems and the level of trustworthiness for that functionality. The SDLC, the development acquisition phase, that's phase two. Organizations also address risk management issues during the development/acquisition phase of the SDLC, system design, system development, integration, and demonstration. Whether in response to specific and credible threat information or assumptions about the threat, potential design-related vulnerabilities in information systems can be mitigated during the development acquisition phase by choosing less susceptible alternatives. So you know your threat sources, you know possible threat events, and so you mitigate. You start to mitigate in the development acquisition phase. Supply chain risk during the acquisition phase of the information system is also an area of concern for businesses. To address supply chain risk during the development acquisition phase, your organization will implement specific security controls as deemed necessary by your organization. You also consider risk from the standpoint of the environment in which the information systems are intended to operate when selecting the most appropriate security controls. To be effective, controls must be mutually supporting, employed with realistic expectations for effectiveness, and implemented as part of an explicit information system level security architecture that is consistent with the security architecture embedded in the organization's enterprise architecture. So you don't just establish your enterprise architecture and the security architecture and leave it at tier two. It comes down to the system level and actually gets implemented there. For example, when certain technical controls are less than effective due to achievable levels of trustworthiness in information systems, management and operational controls are employed as compensating controls, thus providing another way to manage risk. All right, at the implementation phase of the SDLC provides an opportunity for the business to determine the effectiveness of selected security controls employed within or inherited by the information systems under development before going live with those systems. Expectations generated during this phase can be compared with actual behavior as the information systems are implemented. Given the current threat information that is available to the business and organizational assumptions about the threat, the information discovered during effectiveness assessments, and the potential adverse impacts on the organization, it may be necessary to change the planned implementation of the information system. So at the implementation phase, when you look at the system that you're developing or acquiring, you consider the threat information that you have and any assumptions about that threat. And you look at the controls in place, you look at the security of that system, and you make a more informed decision about, do we need to change the planned implementation? Do we need to continue moving forward? Risk-related information can be developed to justify any proposed changes at this point. Then you implement the system and move into the operations maintenance phase. So once the system is authorized for operation, information systems move into the operations maintenance phase of the SDLC. The monitoring of security control effectiveness and any changes to organizational information systems and the environments in which they operate ensure that selected risk response measures are operating as intended on an ongoing basis. So in the operation maintenance phase, you are going to institute continuous monitoring. Ongoing monitoring is paramount to maintaining situational awareness of risk, and awareness that is critical to making the necessary course corrections when risk spikes above the organization's risk tolerance. And then finally, we get to the disposal phase of the SDLC. And during the disposal phase, it's standard procedure for you to verifiably remove any information from information systems that could cause negative effects if compromised, and also assess any risk associated with these activities. And a note, while the SDLC is presented here as a linear flow, in reality, the knowledge gained during a later phase of the life cycle or changes in system requirements or operational environments may cause you to have to go back and revisit earlier phases. So we presented it here as linear, but sometimes as iterative. Example, changes in the threat environment during the operation maintenance phase may dictate the need to initiate a new or revised system capability. Baking security in, and if you've been in information security for a minute, you've heard that term. Baking security in is the most cost-effective model. Early integration of information security requirements in the SDLC is the most cost-effective method for implementing the risk management strategy at Tier 3. The sooner you start thinking about security in the process, the better you can do it and the less it's going to cost you. Incorporating risk management into the SDLC ensures that the risk management process is not isolated from the other management processes employed by the organization to develop, acquire, implement, operate, and maintain the information systems supporting organizational missions and business functions. To support SDLC integration, risk management is also incorporated into program, planning, and budgeting activities to help ensure that appropriate resources are available when needed, facilitating the completion of program and project milestones established by the business. To incorporate risk management into program planning and budgeting activities, risk and information security professionals are a key part of the teams and the structures used to address information system and organizational requirements. And what I mean by that is bring your security people in and your risk management professionals in at the beginning of the SDLC process. Have them at the table while you're discussing requirements so that you begin to address and budget for the security requirements of that system, because it will cost you a lot less than if you get into the implementation phase and discover, wait, we don't have some capability, and you have to go back and bolt that on. It's going to cost a lot more. So bring security in early, bring your risk management team in early. Resilience, the overall resilience of organizational information systems, that's how well your systems operate under stress, is a key factor and performance measure in determining the potential survivability of business functions. The use of certain information technologies may introduce inherent vulnerabilities into those systems, resulting in risks that may have to be mitigated by re-engineering the current business process. Again, the wise use of information technologies during the design, development, and implementation of information systems is of key importance in managing risk. So now we're going to move into talking about some risk management concepts. First up, trust and trustworthiness, and then we'll cover organizational culture, and we'll talk about relationships among key risk concepts. Trust and trustworthiness. Trust is an important concept related to risk management. How organizations approach trust influences their behaviors and their internal and external trust relationships. This section introduces some conceptual ways of thinking about trust, defines the concept of trustworthiness, and shows how the concept of trustworthiness can be used in developing trust relationships. Appendix G of NIST Special Publication 839 describes several trust models that can be applied in an organizational concept and considers how trust can be measured. The importance of organizational governance, culture, and transparency are also considered with regard to trust and its effect on risk management. So trust, what is trust? It's the belief that an entity will behave in a predictable manner in specified circumstances. And the entity can be a person, process, object, or any combination of those components. The entity can be of any size, from a single hardware component or software module to a piece of equipment identified by make and model, to a site or location, to an organization, or to a nation state. Trust, while inherently subjective, can be based on objective evidence and subjective elements. The objective grounds for trust can include, for example, the results of IT product testing and evaluation. Subjective belief, level of comfort, and experience may supplement or even replace objective evidence or substitute for such evidence when it is unavailable. Trust is usually relative to a specific circumstance or situation. For example, the amount of money involved in a transaction, the sensitivity or criticality of information, or whether safety is an issue with human lives at stake. Trust is generally not transitive. You trust a friend, but not necessarily a friend of a friend. And finally, trust is generally earned based on experience or measurement. However, in certain organizations, trust may be mandated by policy. And that's called a mandated trust model. So, what is trustworthiness? Trustworthiness is an attribute of a person or organization that provides confidence to others of the qualifications, capabilities, and reliability of that entity to perform specific tasks and fulfill assigned responsibilities. Again, trustworthiness is an attribute of a person or organization that provides confidence to others of the qualifications, capabilities, and reliability of that entity to perform specific tasks and fulfill assigned responsibilities. Trustworthiness is also a characteristic of information technology products and systems. The attribute of trustworthiness, whether applied to people, processes, or technology, can be measured, at least in relative terms, if not quantitatively. The determination of trustworthiness plays a key role in establishing trust relationships among people and organizations. The trust relationships are key factors in risk decisions made by senior executives. So that's why we're talking about trust and trustworthiness, because they both impact risk decisions. Establishing trust among organizations. Parties enter into trust relationships based on mission and business needs. Trust among parties typically exists along a continuum with varying degrees of trust achieved based on a number of factors. Organizations can still share information and obtain information technology services, even if their trust relationship falls short of complete trust. The degree of trust required for organizations to establish partnerships can vary widely based on many factors, including the organizations involved and the specifics of the situation. For example, the missions, the goals, and objectives of the potential partners, the sensitivity of the activities involved in the partnership, the risk tolerance of the organizations participating in the partnership, and the history between the partners. Finally, the degree of trust among entities is not a static quality, but it can vary over time as circumstances change. This brings us to addressing the risk of external service providers, third party risk management. Organizations are becoming increasingly reliant on information system services and information provided by external organizations, as well as partnerships to accomplish business functions and missions. This reliance results in the need for trust relationships among organizations. External providers or business partners can be public or private sector entities, domestic or international, but you're going to have to develop trust relationships. In many cases, trust relationships with external organizations generate greater productivity and cost effectiveness, but also bring greater risk to organizations. Let me say that again. In many cases, trust relationships with external organizations generate greater productivity and cost efficiencies, but also bring greater risk to your organization. And this risk is addressed by risk management strategies that take into account the strategic goals and objectives of the organizations. Here's some things to do and consider with external service providers. One, define the types of services and or information to be provided to organizations, or the types of information to be shared or exchanged in any proposed partnering arrangements. Two, establish the degree of control or influence that organizations have over the external organizations participating in partnering arrangements. How much control will you have on that third party supplier or that business partner? Describe how the services information are to be protected in accordance with the information security requirements of the organizations. Four, obtain the relevant information from external organizations to determine trustworthiness and to support and maintain trust. For example, visibility into business practices and risk information security decisions to understand their risk tolerance. Things to do with external service providers to do and consider. One, appropriately balance the mission and business-based requirements to support information sharing, while also considering the risk of working with competing or hostile entities and the risk that other organizations, while neither competing or hostile, may be a path through which such entities attack. I think it was the Target breach that happened as a result of a third party HVAC vendor, I believe. So anytime you open your organization and your organization's information to a third party, there is some risk associated with that. To determine if the ongoing risk to your organization resulting from the continuing use of the services or the participation in the partnership is at an acceptable level. So you want to monitor that risk and recognize that decisions to establish trust relationships are expressions of acceptable risk. The degree of trust can vary widely. The degree of trust that an organization places in external organizations can vary widely, ranging from those who are highly trusted to those who are less trusted and may represent greater sources of risk. For example, business partners in one endeavor who are also competitors or adversaries. The specifics of establishing and maintaining trust can differ from organization to organization based on your business requirements, the participants involved in the trust relationship, the criticality sensitivity of the information that's being shared or the types of services being rendered, the history between the organizations, and the overall risk to the organizations participating in the trust relationship. The degree of trust may limit sharing of information and services. In many situations, the trust established between organizations may not allow a full spectrum of information sharing or complete provision of services. When an organization determines that the trustworthiness of another organization does not permit the complete sharing of information or use of external services, then the organization can mitigate risk, transfer risk, or share risk by employing compensating controls, can accept a greater degree of risk, or can avoid the risk by performing the business functions with reduced levels of functionality or possibly no functionality at all. Risk tolerance is part of the risk management strategy. Note, explicit understanding and acceptance of risk to an organization's operations and assets by senior leaders, as reflected in the organization's risk tolerance, are made in accordance with the organization's risk management strategy and a prerequisite for establishing trust relationships among organizations. All right, let's talk about the trustworthiness of information systems. And we actually have a few more slides to go, so I think I'm probably going to break this presentation up, but I'll keep going for now. Trustworthiness expresses the degree to which information systems, including the IT products from which the systems are built, can be expected to preserve the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information that's being processed, stored, or transmitted by the systems across the full range of threats. Trustworthy information systems are systems that have been determined to have the level of trustworthiness necessary to operate within defined levels of risk, despite the environmental disruptions, human errors, and purposeful attacks that are expected to occur in their environments of operation. Two factors affect the trustworthiness of information systems: security functionality and security assurance. Security functionality is the security features and functions employed within the system, and security assurance is the grounds for confidence that the security functionality is effective in its application. Security functionality, features and functions of the system. Security functionality is the security features and functions employed within the system. Security functionality can be obtained by employing a combination of management, operational, and technical security controls from NIST Special Publication 853, which is the control catalog for NIST Risk Management. The employment of appropriate security controls for information systems and environments of operation is guided by the first three steps in the risk management framework. Prepare, categorize, select, and implement. Categorize, select, and implement. Security assurance is your grounds for confidence in the security of the system. Security assurance is the grounds for confidence that the security functionality is effective in its application. Security assurance is a critical aspect in determining whether the information system is trustworthy. Assurance is the measure of the confidence that the security features, practices, procedures, and architecture of an information system accurately mediates and enforces the security policy. Assurance also represents the grounds for confidence that the intended functionality of an information system is correct, always invoked when needed, and resistance to bypass or tampering. So, how do you get security assurance? Well, assurance is obtained one by the actions taken by developers and implementers with regard to design, development, implementation, and operations of the security functionality. For example, your security controls. And assurance is obtained by the actions taken by assessors to determine the extent to which the functionality is implemented correctly, operating as intended, and producing the desired outcome in meeting the security requirements for the information system and the environment of operation. So you get your security assurance by how well the developers and implementers design, develop, and implement the security functionality, but also by the actions taken by your assessors who determine whether those security controls were implemented correctly and are working the way they're supposed to work. All right, the basis for assurance for IT products and systems is commonly based on the assessments conducted during the initiation, acquisition, development, implementation, and operations maintenance phases of the system development lifecycle. For example, developmental evidence may include the techniques and methods used to design and develop the security functionality of a product. Operational evidence may include flaw reporting and remediation, the results of security incident reporting, and the results of ongoing security control monitoring. Independent assessments by qualified assessors may include an analysis of the evidence as well as testing, inspections, and audits of the implementation of the selected security functionality. Your organization will meet minimum assurance requirements specified in Appendix E of NIST Special Publication 853. 853A provides guidance on how to assess security controls in information systems. So it's a lot. Just know that at a high level. Don't worry about remembering all the details of what I said there. Assurance and trustworthiness are closely related. Assurance contributes to the trustworthiness determination relative to an IT product or information systems. Developers and implementers may provide assurance evidence by generating the results of independent testing and evaluation, design documentation, high-level or low-level specifications, source code analysis. Organizations that use IT products or systems may perform or rely on others to perform some form of assessment on the products or systems. Organizations may also have direct experience with the product or system or may receive information about the performance of the product or system from third parties, for example, Gartner. Organizations typically evaluate all of the available assurance evidence, often applying different weighting factors as appropriate to determine the trustworthiness of the product or system. Higher trustworthiness equals lower flaws and higher penetration resistance. IT products and systems that exhibit a high degree of trustworthiness are expected to exhibit a lower rate of latent design and implementation flaws and a higher degree of penetration resistance against a range of threats, including sophisticated cyber attacks, natural disasters, accidents, and intentional or unintentional errors. The degree of trustworthiness needed is guided by the business function's susceptibility to known threats, the environments of operation where information systems are deployed, and the maximum acceptable level of risk. Trustworthiness is going to be a key factor in selecting information products. Insufficient attention to trustworthiness of information technology products and systems can negatively affect your organization's capability to successfully carry out its business functions. So we're not belaboring this point for no cause. All right, let's talk quickly about organizational culture and relationships among key risk concepts. Organizational culture refers to the values, beliefs, and norms that influence the behaviors and actions of your senior executives and individual members of organizations. Culture describes the way things are done in organizations and can explain why certain things occur. There's a direct relationship between culture and how organizations respond to uncertainties and the potential for near-term benefits to be the source for longer-term losses. The culture informs and even to perhaps a large degree defines the organization's risk management strategy. At a minimum, when an express risk management strategy isn't consistent with the organization's culture, then it is likely that the strategy will be difficult, if not impossible, to implement. Recognizing and addressing the significant influence that culture has on risk-related decisions of senior leaders can be key to achieving effective risk management. Culture impacts the implementation of a risk management program. The implementation of a risk management program can be a major organizational change. This change has to be effectively managed, and understanding the culture of your organization plays an important part in achieving organization-wide change. Implementing an effective risk management process may well represent a significant organization-wide change, aligning people, processes, and culture within the organization with the new or revised organizational goals and objectives. The risk management strategy and communication mechanisms for sharing risk-related information among entities. To effectively manage this change, organizations must include cultural considerations such as a fundamental component in their strategic level and thinking and the decision-making processes. If your senior leaders understand the importance of culture, then they will have a better chance of achieving the strategic goals and objectives by successfully managing risk. But you ignore culture to your own detriment. Culture impacts the degree of risk that your organization will incur. It reflects an organization's willingness to adopt new and leading edge information technologies. Some businesses, they've got their systems, they're working, they don't see a need to update. Other companies always have the latest and greatest technology. Know the culture of your organization because it will impact your risk management. For example, organizations engaged in R&D activities may be more likely to push technological boundaries. Such organizations are prone to be early adopters of new technology and more likely to view new technologies from the standpoint of the potential benefits that could be achieved versus potential harm for use. In contrast, organizations that engage in security-related activities may be more conservative by nature and less likely to push technology boundaries, being more suspicious of new technologies, especially if provided by some entity with which the organization lacks familiarity and trust. These types of organizations that are more conservative are less likely to be early adopters of new technologies and would be more inclined to look at the potential harm caused by the adoption of new technologies. Another example is that some organizations have a history of developing proprietary software applications and services or procuring software applications and services solely for their use. Some companies run on proprietary systems. These organizations may be reluctant to use externally provided software applications and services, and this reluctance may result in lower risk being incurred. On the other hand, organizations may seek to maximize advantages achieved by modern net-centric architectures, where hardware, software, and services are typically provided by external organizations. Since your organization will not have direct control over assessment, auditing, and oversight activities of external providers, then you incur greater risk. But again, all of that is cultural. Now, cultural issues between organizations, where two or more organizations are operating together toward a common purpose, there is a possibility that cultural differences in each of the respective organizations may result in different risk management strategies, propensity to incur risk, and willingness to accept risk. For example, assume two organizations are working together to create a common security service intended to address the advanced persistent threat. The culture of one of the organizations may result in a focus on preventing unauthorized disclosure of information, while the nature of the other organization may result in an emphasis on mission continuity. The differences in focus and emphasis resulting from culture can generate different priorities and expectations regarding what security services to procure because the organizations perceive the nature of the threat differently. Again, ignore culture to your own detriment. Now, cultural issues within organizations. Whoa, culture related disconnects don't occur solely between organizations, but can also occur within organizations where different organizational components, business units have different values and perhaps risk tolerances. Um, an example of an internal disconnect can be observed, for example, in a hospital that emphasizes different cultures between protecting the personal privacy of patients and the availability of having medical information available to medical professionals for treatment purposes. I think I bungled that sentence. Okay, culture influences and impacts can be felt across all three tiers. In the multi-tiered risk management approach, cultural influences and impacts can be felt across all three tiers. Senior leaders directly and indirectly in tier one governance structures set the stage for how the organization is going to respond to various approaches to managing risk. Senior leaders establish the risk tolerance for the organization, both formally through publication of strategy and guidance documents, and informally through how they behave, through what actions get reported and what actions get penalized, and the degree of consistency in actions and the degree of accountability that's enforced. The direction that is set by senior leaders and the understanding of existing organizational values and priorities are major factors determining how risk is going to be managed in your organization. And finally, let's talk about relationships among key risk concepts. We are almost done, guys. Thank you so much for hanging in there. We're almost done. Relationships among key risk concepts. There are a variety of risk-related concepts, risk tolerance, trust, and culture, all of which have an impact on risk management. The concepts don't occur in a vacuum. Rather, there is often a strong interplay among the concepts. For example, an organization's culture, along with its governance structures and processes, often influence the pace of change and the implementation of the risk management strategy. For this reason, the risk executive function and other parties involved in organizational risk-based decisions need to be aware and have an appreciation for all of the concepts. Governance, risk tolerance, and trust. As part of implementing the risk management strategy at Tier 1, the risk executive function establishes practices for sharing risk-related information with external entities. With regard to demonstrating due diligence for managing risk, organizations that are less risk tolerant are likely to require more supporting evidence than organizations that are more risk tolerant. Such organizations may only trust and hence partner with organizations with which they have had a long and successful relationship. And that's your historical trust model. The amount of centralization within an organization may be reflective of the organizational risk tolerance and or its willingness to trust partnering organizations. Some organizations select a decentralized governance structure for reasons such as widely diverging mission business areas or a need for increased separation between business lines due to the sensitivity of the work. The reasons for decentralization may reflect and likely will influence risk tolerance. For instance, if there are no partnering organizations meeting the established trust qualifications, less risk-tolerant organizations may require significantly more supporting evidence of due diligence. For example, access to risk assessment, security plans, security assessment reports, risk acceptance decisions than is typically required in such situations. And this falls under validated trust model. Trust and culture. There is also potential interplay between the concepts of risk, trust, and culture. Changes in mission business requirements to interconnect information systems for the purpose of sharing information may require a greater acceptance of risk than is typical for that organization. Let me say that again. Changes in business requirements may require a greater acceptance of risk than is typical for that organization. In the short term, additional measures may be needed to establish and or build trust. For example, increased transparency between interconnecting organizations. Such measures facilitate building trust and evolving organizational beliefs and norms over the long term. Still talking about trust and culture, the interaction between trust and culture can also be observed when there are gaps and overlaps in responsibility among an organization's business units that may impact the ability for proposed actions, especially new actions, to be quickly carried out. For example, many organizations with decentralized governance structures may be slower to embrace change unless there has been an extensive effort to expand coordination and improve trust among organizational units. Assume that some organizations are directed by higher authorities, for example, in a mandated trust model, to share information more freely with peer organizations. If the organizations have a history and culture of tightly controlling information, they may be reluctant to share information with outside entities, even though directed to do so. In such situations, your organization may require that partnering organizations provide concrete evidence of the steps taken to protect the information designated for sharing prior to releasing that information. All right, let's switch and talk about investment strategy and risk tolerance. Investment strategies and risk tolerance have linkages. Organizations may recognize that there is a need to address advanced persistent threats, while adversaries have achieved some degree of penetration of and foothold within information systems and the environment in which those systems operate. The strategic investments that are required to address these types of threats may in part be influenced by the risk tolerance of the organization. Less risk tolerance organizations may focus investments on information technologies that prevent adversaries from gaining further access within the organization and are limiting the degree of harm done to the organizations, even if at the expense of achieving some of the business benefits that automation can provide. More risk tolerant organizations may focus investments on information technologies that provide greater mission business benefits, even if these benefits are achieved, at the expense of adversaries gaining some advantage or benefit from compromising the information systems. Culture and risk tolerance. A major part of managing risk within your organization is identifying what the risk tolerance is for a particular type of loss. Risk tolerance can be described as a combination of the cultural willingness to accept certain types of loss within organizations and the subjective risk-related actions of senior leaders. Again, risk tolerance is a combination of the cultural willingness to accept certain types of loss within organizations and the subjective risk-related actions of senior leaders. Risk-based decisions within organizations often reflect the blending of the risk tolerance of the senior executives and the risk tolerance that is embedded within the culture of the organization. In establishing organizational risk tolerance, the values, beliefs, and norms of organizations are examined in order to understand why risk trade-offs are made. For some businesses in particular, those organizations that deal with critical and or sensitive information, PII, or classified information, the emphasis is often on preventing unauthorized disclosure. In contrast, in those organizations driven by a combination of organizational culture and the nature of their mission and business functions, the emphasis is on maintaining the availability of information systems to achieve an ongoing operational capability. As part of establishing risk tolerance, a risk assessment will identify the risk and levels of risk to which organizations may be exposed. And then this assessment considers both the likelihood and impact of undesired events. And so that is the introduction to managing information security risk. That's your basic information that you need as a lead-in. This publication, this special publication 839, is part of a group of related publications produced by a joint task force for managing information security risk in federal organizations. And if you're going the NIST path and you're trying to understand what NIST says, or your company is implementing the NIST cybersecurity framework, The publication that you want to take a look at is NIST 839, which is this one, and it's going to be covered in this video and about 5 others. So it'll be on a playlist for you. Look at 830, which is your guide for conducting risk assessments. 837 talks about the risk management framework. 853 is a catalog of security controls that you can implement. And 853 is a guide for assessing those security controls. If you are going to be a NIST practitioner, those are the 5 publications that you absolutely must understand to be effective. So I have them here for reference. And I thank you so much for hanging in there with me. ISO standards also come into play. That'll also be in the presentation. And we are done. And I thank you so much. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video.